The Milanese Gallery, Galleria di Luce, is a temple of cold marble, glass, and shadows. A place where art is not valued for its beauty, but for its potential to leverage influence. It is a sterile, hyper-modern space where the scent of expensive floor polish battles the faint, musty aroma of ancient canvas. Within these walls, a silent, high-stakes war is being waged, not with artillery, but with reputations, status, and the cutting edge of professional disdain. At the epicenter of this atmosphere stands Vivian Wallen, the 29-year-old owner of the gallery. Vivian is the personification of cold, calculated elegance. She navigates her own domain with the predatory grace of an apex predator, always dressed in meticulously tailored, monochromatic suits, sharp blacks, icy whites, or stark grays, that serve as a structural extension of her own formidable personality. Her hair is pulled back with such severe geometric precision that it seems impossible for a single strand to fall out of place. Vivian does not simply walk. She commands the environment to adjust to her presence. To her, art is a currency, and her gallery is a vault. She possesses an uncanny ability to dismantle a person's confidence with a single, lingering glance or a tone of voice so chillingly polite that it cuts deeper than a direct insult. Across from her, existing in a state of perpetually disheveled brilliance, is Cleo Frost. At 21, Cleo is the anomaly. A restoration genius who views the high society world of the Milanese art scene as a grotesque circus. She operates in a small, dimly lit workshop, tucked behind the gallery's main display. Cleo is a creature of texture and grit. She favors vintage, paint-stained jumpsuits that carry the permanent scent of linseed oil, turpentine, and dust. While Vivian is a master of the veneer, Cleo is a master of the underlying structure. She sees the cracks in the paint, the hidden layers of varnish, and the history that everyone else ignores. To Vivian, Cleo is a barbarian, a brilliant one, admittedly, but a barbarian nonetheless, whose existence is a constant affront to the sanitized, pristine aesthetic she has cultivated. The enmity between them is as public as it is intense. When Vivian walks into the workshop, her presence is like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. She finds faults where none exist, nitpicking the microscopic details of Cleo's brushwork, not because the restoration is failing, but because Vivian enjoys the friction. She treats Cleo like a talented stray dog that she has grudgingly taken in and now finds perpetually annoying. Vivian's public disparagement of Cleo's lack of sophistication is a calculated tactic, a performance for the wealthy, vapid collectors who flock to the gallery. She positions herself as the superior, the gatekeeper of taste, while casting Cleo as the rough-edged tool, indispensable, yet fundamentally beneath notice. "You have a remarkable talent for precision, Miss Frost," Vivienne once remarked during a gala, her voice loud enough to be heard by a group of eager investors, yet perfectly devoid of warmth. "It's a shame your aesthetic sensibilities seem to be permanently trapped in a garage. It's almost impressive how you manage to treat a 17th century masterpiece with the same casual disregard as one might treat a bicycle." The laughter of the investors followed, polished and hollow. Cleo, standing there with her sleeves rolled up and her hands stained with pigment, did not blush or falter. She simply met Vivian's gaze with a steady, unflinching stare that for a split second silenced the room. Cleo knew, as did Vivian, that the restoration she had performed on that particular canvas was flawless, a feat of technical mastery that would have taken any other expert months to replicate. This is their status quo. It is a brutal, exhausting cycle of provocation and restraint. Vivian needs Cleo's genius to maintain the facade of the gallery's integrity, especially as it teeters on the brink of financial ruin due to the influx of high-quality forgeries flooding the market. Cleo needs Vivian's gallery as her only means of working with the world's most significant pieces. Yet, behind the public displays of contempt, there is a strange, paradoxical tethering. Vivian's obsession with correcting Cleo is not merely bullying. It is a manifestation of an obsessive need to be the only person who truly sees Cleo's brilliance. She guards Cleo's talent with the same ferocity with which she guards her own reputation. They are two poles of a magnet, pushing away with all their might, yet incapable of moving beyond the other's orbit. Every encounter is a test of will, a silent negotiation of power that plays out in the shadows of the gallery. Vivian is the ice, and Cleo is the fire that threatens to melt her perfectly constructed reality. And in the heart of Milan, they are trapped in a dance of hatred that is beginning to feel increasingly, dangerously, like something else entirely. The Galleria di Luce After Hours is a world defined by the acoustic precision of its silence. The air is so still it feels heavy, an atmospheric weight that amplifies every minor vibration. Into this quietude steps Vivian Wallen, her presence heralded not by a greeting, but by the relentless, sharp staccato of her stilettos against the polished marble floor. Click, click, click. It is a sound of absolute authority, a rhythmic assertion of ownership that rings through the vaulted ceilings and dies in the corners of the cavernous exhibition hall. Cleo Frost is hunched over a workbench in the back, the harsh, concentrated beam of her halogen lamp carving out a small, isolated universe of focused intent. The sounds of her craft are intimate and rhythmic, the whisper of a solvent-dampened swab against canvas, the microscopic scrape of a steel scalpel removing centuries-old oxidized varnish, the faint sigh of a woman holding her breath to steady her hand. It is a world of extreme patience and profound technical humility. Vivian doesn't stop until she is standing directly behind Cleo. She doesn't announce herself. She simply arrives, a sudden change in the temperature of the room. She watches for a long, agonizing moment, her shadow stretching across the workbench and obscuring the very detail Cleo is struggling to perfect. "You're over-thinning the varnish on the corner," Vivian says, her voice a low, cool stream of condescension. She doesn't raise her volume, yet the words carry the authority of a judge passing sentence. Cleo stiffens, but she doesn't stop her work. She refuses to look up. "It's a matter of translucency, Vivian. If I don't strip it back to the original glaze, the entire light structure of the painting collapses. You'd know that if you ever spent an hour holding a brush instead of a glass of champagne." Vivian's reaction is a slow, predatory tightening of her posture. She moves around the workbench, invading Cleo's sanctuary with an arrogance that is almost performative. She leans over, her hands, clad in thin, expensive silk, bracing against the edges of the table, pinning Cleo in her workspace. The scent of Vivian's cold, crisp perfume, hints of bergamot and dry cedar, overwhelms the workshop's familiar smell of chemicals. Vivian reaches out, her gloved fingers firm as she catches Cleo's chin, forcing her face upward. It is a gesture of total control, a physical reminder of who holds the strings in this theater of art. Cleo's skin is warm, a stark, feverish contrast to Vivian's icy composure. "Your technical skill is undeniable, Cleo," Vivian whispers, leaning in until their breaths mingle in the confined light of the lamp. "But you're still a child playing with mud. You think you're creating, but you're just repairing. You are a footnote to someone else's greatness. Your art, your precious, obsessive, paint-stained art, is nothing more than dirt and pigment until I decide to give it a status. You exist here because I allow it, and your work only has value when I decide it does." Cleo stares back, her pulse visible in the frantic, rhythmic throb at the base of her throat. She is trapped in the narrow angle of the workbench, trapped by Vivian's gaze, and trapped by the undeniable, suffocating magnetism of the older woman's proximity. She doesn't speak. She cannot. The silence between them is fraught with a tension that has nothing to do with the painting, and everything to do with the electricity of the collision. The challenge in Cleo's eyes is not one of fear. It is a silent, defiant roar. She is seeing the cracks in Vivian's poise, the slight hesitation in her grip, the way her eyes dart toward Cleo's lips for a heartbeat too long. It is a look that Vivian clearly finds infuriating, yet she makes no move to let go. Instead, she holds the position, leaning into the space between them, her gaze descending to the stray smudge of ultramarine blue on Cleo's cheek. "Look at yourself," Vivian murmurs, her voice losing its icy sharpness, deepening into something much more volatile and dangerous. "Covered in the tools of your trade, smelling of solvents, wasting your brilliance in abasement. It's pathetic. And yet..." She trails off, her thumb brushing against Cleo's jawline, a touch that feels less like a taunt and more like a probe. Vivian is looking for a reaction, a flinch, a capitulation, a plea. What she gets is Cleo leaning slightly into the touch, a move that is both a challenge and a surrender. The air in the room seems to grow thicker, the silence vibrating with the suppressed energy of the argument they are having, without a single word. They are two masters of their own disciplines, trapped in a cold war where the stakes are shifting beneath their feet, neither willing to be the first to break the tension, and both realizing that their intellectual opposition is rapidly evolving into something that could destroy the very foundation they stand upon. The dead of night at the Galleria di Luce transforms the pristine exhibition halls into a realm of stark, unnerving shadows. The air conditioning hums a low, mechanical monotone that feels like a heartbeat for the building, and the silence is so absolute it rings in the ears. Cleo, unable to shake an intuition that something about the latest batch of forgeries was fundamentally wrong, has stayed behind. The brushstrokes, the age of the binding agents, the way the pigments reacted to her solvent tests, none of it aligned with the profile of a modern fake. Her work leads her to the forbidden depths of the gallery's subterranean storage vault. Her heart hammers against her ribs as she navigates the labyrinthine rows of climate-controlled racks. Using a modified passcode she'd surreptitiously lifted from the gallery's digital maintenance logs, she enters the central chamber. The beam of her flashlight cuts through the gloom, illuminating rows of canvases. As she pulls back the protective fabric from one of the pieces she was assigned to clean, her breath catches in her throat. It isn't a forgery. It is a masterpiece. A long-lost Caravaggio, reported stolen decades ago, hidden beneath a superficial, removable layer of modern acrylic sludge. She moves to the next, then the next. Each one is a treasure of incalculable value. Masterpieces that vanished into the void of the black market. She realizes, with a sickening jolt, the magnitude of the situation. Vivian isn't just selling forgeries. She is the conduit. Cleo reaches for her phone, her fingers trembling as she pulls up the emergency contact for the Italian Art Crimes Division. Her thumb hovers over the call button, her mind racing with the implications. She is about to be the whistleblower who dismantles the city's most prestigious gallery. A sharp, metallic clack of heels echoes from the vault entrance, freezing Cleo in place. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Cleo." The police are notoriously bad at handling delicate canvases, and your cell service is jammed anyway. Vivian stands in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the harsh overhead light of the corridor. She is not in her usual suit. She is dressed in a dark, functional trench coat, her expression unreadable. She moves into the vault with the effortless grace of a ghost, not reaching for a weapon or a security alarm, but instead moving toward the nearest rack. Cleo holds the flashlight like a club, her voice shaking but defiant. "I saw them, Vivian. All of them. You're a thief. You've been using this gallery to launder stolen history. I don't care how much you try to frame this. The evidence is right here." Vivian stops, looking at a small, haunting portrait of a nobleman. She turns to face Cleo, and for the first time, the Ice Queen facade seems to fracture. She doesn't look like a villain. She looks profoundly tired. She reaches into the pocket of her coat and produces a small, encrypted data drive, holding it out toward Cleo. "Look at the data, Cleo. Go on. I've known you were curious since the day I hired you. That was the point of the friction. I needed someone brilliant enough to identify the real ones, but someone outsider enough that the syndicate wouldn't care if she disappeared." Cleo hesitantly plugs the drive into her tablet, scrolling through the files. Her eyes widen as she reads. These aren't records of sales to black market kingpins. They are records of recoveries. Vivian has been intercepting these paintings from a brutal, corrupt global syndicate, pulling them out of private, inaccessible bunkers where they were destined to be destroyed or lost to time. She hasn't been laundering them. She has been keeping them, waiting for the perfect moment to return them to the public sphere. But to do so, she had to act the part of the most ruthless, opportunistic dealer in Milan to keep the syndicate off her trail. "Why?" Cleo whispers, the flashlight dropping to her side, its beam settling on the floor. "Why all the cruelty? Why treat me like I was a peasant to be discarded?" Vivienne walks closer, her gaze intense, searching. "Because in this world, Cleo, if I showed you kindness, they would have smelled it on me. They would have destroyed you to hurt me. I had to make everyone believe that you were just another instrument I was playing, that we were enemies, so that when the final move came, no one would ever suspect we were partners. I needed a restoration genius, yes, but I also needed someone who could stand against me publicly while working with me in the dark." Vivienne gestures to the room full of stolen wonders. "I'm not a dealer, Cleo. I'm a grave robber for the living. I've been building the case against the syndicate owners, the people who actually pull the strings of this city, for 5 years. But I'm only one person. I have the leverage, but I don't have the technical expertise to prove the provenance of every single one of these. That's where you come in. The air in the vault shifts. The suspicion that had been the foundation of their relationship evaporates, leaving something far more complex and dangerous in its place. Vivian reaches out, her hand hovering in the air before she finally touches Cleo's arm, her touch hesitant, almost vulnerable. "I didn't want to hate you," Vivian confesses, her voice dropping to a raw, honest register. "I wanted to protect you from the very world I was forced to navigate. But to do that, I had to be the person you would never, ever trust." Cleo looks at the paintings, then back at Vivian. The realization settles in. They are not just conspirators. They are two sides of the same coin, both fighting a war against the filth of the art world, from different positions. The hostility of the last few months wasn't a failure of their relationship. It was the only shield they had. And now, the true, lethal work begins. The basement of the Galleria de Luce is no longer a place of work, but the nerve center of their silent rebellion. Surrounded by the cold, metallic hum of servers and the scent of ozone and dust, the two women stand amidst a sea of scattered archives. The frantic energy of their initial discovery has cooled into something far more dangerous: a calculated, synchronized determination. Cleo stares at the digital trail, her fingers flying across the interface, deciphering the complex layers of obfuscation that Vivian has spent years constructing. She finally understands the architecture of their enmity. Every public humiliation, every cutting remark, every icy glare Vivian leveled at her in front of their wealthy, sycophantic clientele wasn't just a power play. It was a carefully curated performance. "The board of directors," Cleo whispers, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "They were watching us, weren't they? They kept tabs on every hire, every restoration, every scrap of gossip in the gallery." Vivian, standing by the door with her arms crossed, nods slowly. Her posture is no longer rigid with artificial poise. It is the stance of someone finally allowed to exhale. The syndicate that controls this gallery doesn't tolerate empathy or genuine collaboration. If they had suspected for a single second that I was scouting for an ally, or that you were anything more than a replaceable, unrefined set of hands, they would have replaced both of us before the ink dried on your contract. The hatred, the feud, it was the only safe place for us to exist. They found our constant bickering entertaining. It made us look petty, small, and entirely predictable. Cleo looks up from the monitor, her eyes reflecting the glowing data. She realizes now why Vivian had been so obsessed with her, why the older woman had stalked her workbench, why every correction had been delivered with such intense, focused proximity. It hadn't been about the paint. It had been about creating a narrative, a public mask of disdain that gave them the privacy to communicate in a language of barbs and challenges. The brain and the shield had been forged in a crucible of public performance, each insult a coded signal of where they stood in the broader game. "You used me," Cleo says, though there is no malice in her tone. "You used my talent, but you also used my frustration. You knew I'd fight back. You knew I wouldn't play the victim, which is exactly what the syndicate expected." "I needed someone who could withstand the heat," Vivian replies, her voice softening, losing that familiar razor-sharp edge. "I needed someone brilliant enough to distinguish a masterwork from a counterfeit with their eyes closed, but stubborn enough to keep doing it while I was screaming at them. I had to push you, Cleo. I had to see if your resolve was as solid as your skill. If you had folded, if you had walked away, You would have been safe, but we both would have lost. The revelation hits Cleo with the force of a physical blow. Their entire dynamic, which she had experienced as a series of personal affronts, was actually a meticulously choreographed act of survival. Every time Vivian had forced her to look at an error or belittled her aesthetic sensibility, it was a test of Cleo's ability to operate under external pressure, an essential skill for the coming night. They were not two people who simply stopped hating each other. They were two people who had spent the entire semester testing the limits of their shared resolve. They are no longer owner and restorer. In the flickering blue light of the subterranean room, they are equal co-conspirators. The roles they played for the public, the cold, calculating owner and the paint-splattered outsider, have become obsolete, shed like a costume after the curtain falls. The auction, Cleo murmurs, her gaze shifting back to the digital list of incoming guests. The syndicate owners will be there, won't they? They expect to see the shameful restoration work finished by tonight. They expect us to be at each other's throats. Vivian walks toward the desk, her expression dark with resolve. They expect a masterpiece, and they're going to get one, just not the one they paid for. You've spent the last few weeks secretly identifying the layers on the fake canvases. We have the originals hidden in the inner vault, and the evidence of the syndicate's financial crimes compiled. Once the gavel drops on the first lot, we'll trigger the sub-server override. The authorities will have everything they need to dismantle the gallery from the inside out. The air in the room is thick with a sense of inevitability. They are standing on the precipice of their own liberation. For the first time, Cleo truly sees Vivian, not as the ice-cold titan of industry, but as a woman who had been just as trapped as she was, living a life of performance to secure a future she could finally call her own. You did all of this, Cleo says, her voice barely a whisper. Just to bring me in. You knew I was the only one who could make the switch without them noticing. Vivian leans in, her shadow merging with Cleo's in the low light. I knew you were the only one who wouldn't be afraid to help me burn it all down. We've been playing enemies long enough, Cleo. Tomorrow morning, there won't be a gallery left, and there won't be any roles left to play. For the first time, we'll be able to decide who we are when nobody is watching. As they finalize the last of the protocols, the tension between them is no longer about intellectual dominance. It is about the heavy, exhilarating reality that they have both sacrificed everything for this moment. They are bound together by the weight of their secrets and the audacity of their plan. The hostility has dissolved, leaving only a raw, terrifying, and deeply intimate connection in its wake. They are ready for the auction, and they are ready for the aftermath, where the gallery is nothing more than a memory, and they are, finally, just themselves. The night of the auction arrives, a night that smells of expensive champagne, predatory ambition, and the metallic tang of an impending storm. The Galleria di Luce is pulsing with the high-frequency energy of Milan's elite. Men in bespoke suits and women dripping in diamonds, all gathered to bid on what they believe to be the legitimized acquisitions of the decade. The chandeliers cast a blinding artificial radiance over the gallery, turning the space into a gilded trap. Vivian and Cleo move through the crowd like ghosts, navigating a battlefield. For the last time, they play their parts. Vivian, the glacial, untouchable owner, circulating with effortless poise, and Cleo, the paint-smudged, resentful outsider, lurking near the service entrances. Every smile Vivian bestows upon the syndicate members is a lie. Every glare she throws at Cleo is a coded command. They are living on a knife's edge, waiting for the signal that will tear this facade down once and for all. The moment the first major lot, a masterpiece Cleo had spent weeks meticulously liberating from its fraudulent layers, is presented to the room, Cleo slips behind the main console. Her fingers, stained with the stubborn indigo pigment of her craft, dance across the overrides. In a move that sends a shockwave of confusion through the room, the security systems lock down. The main doors seal with a heavy, magnetic thud. Simultaneously, a localized transmission surges from the gallery's internal servers directly to the Interpol Cybercrimes Division. The evidence files, years of Vivian's covertly gathered surveillance, audio recordings of extortion, and the forensic proof of the syndicate's money laundering, flood the cloud. Chaos breaks out instantly. The elite erupt into a frantic clamor of panic and disbelief. Vivian doesn't react with shock. She reacts with precision. She catches Cleo's eye across the room, and for the briefest, most beautiful moment, the Ice Queen vanishes. There is no performance now. There is only the woman Cleo has come to know in the quiet, desperate hours of the night. Sirens begin to wail in the distance, a rising rhythmic scream that draws nearer by the second. Blue and red lights dance against the gallery's frosted windows. In the ensuing turmoil, Vivian turns toward the service exit, her stride purposeful and quick. She beckons to Cleo, not with a command, but with a simple, desperate reach of her hand. They disappear into the dark corridor, abandoning the million-euro vanity projects of their former lives without a second glance. They burst out into the back alley of the gallery. The humid, midnight air of Milan hits them, smelling of damp cobblestones and rain. The city is a blur of distant, glowing lights and rhythmic neon pulses. They don't stop running until they reach a secluded alcove in the shadows of an ancient stone archway, hidden from the chaotic scene forming at the gallery's front entrance. The weight of their performance, the sheer, crushing burden of the last several months of masks and deception, shatters instantly. Vivian, for the first time, pulls off her pristine white silk gloves, discarding them onto the wet pavement like dead skin. She looks at her hands, steady, unadorned, and finally free. She turns toward Cleo, who stands there, breathless and brilliant, her face still smudged with the charcoal and pigment of their long night's work. Vivian reaches out, her movements uncharacteristically soft, and pulls a strand of hair, dark and matted with paint, away from Cleo's eyes. She keeps her hand there, her palm resting against Cleo's cheek, her thumb tracing the line of her skin. The cold, impenetrable persona Vivian had worn for nearly a decade is completely gone. In its place is a raw, trembling vulnerability. "We did it," Vivian whispers, her voice thick with an overwhelming rush of relief. "It's actually finished." Cleo leans into the touch, her eyes searching Vivian's face for any remnant of the persona she had feared, but finding only the woman who had sacrificed everything to bring her into the light. "I don't want to go back to being an outsider, Vivian, and I don't want to play the role of the queen." "We don't have to," Vivian replies, her voice dropping to a low, intimate rasp. "We're ghosts, Cleo. Nobody knows where we are. We're finally, for the first time, invisible in the only way that matters. we are entirely our own. The distance between them dissolves. There is no more hierarchy, no more status, and no more lies. When they kiss, it isn't the cold, calculated clash of their previous encounters. It is deep, heavy with the weight of everything they have survived, and fueled by a sudden, violent spark of passion that has been suppressed by the artifice of their world. It is a kiss of total abandonment, a sealing of their new reality under the indifferent, glowing eyes of the Milanese night. They pull apart, foreheads resting against each other, surrounded by the echoes of sirens and the distant, fading lights of the gallery. They are two people who have burned down their own prison to find each other. And as they turn to melt into the labyrinthine beauty of the city, they know that the canvas of their future is completely blank. And for the first time, they will paint it exactly how they choose.